All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel where we check out great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and earth-shattering discoveries from obscure sources, ancient and modern, and just things that you probably haven't heard about too much, but if you had, or now that you do, they will change your life, because these are things that will help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today's our 195th video that we've done on the Reciprocal Church, where we're attempting to syncretically put together many spiritual sources into a seamless web of religious practice or spiritual practice. And also, I guess, the corollary, because our Western religions are about to collapse under their own weight, their weight of fraud, psyops, and plagiarism. And in particular, right now, we're talking about the New Testament, working on decoding the New Testament, in particular the book of Luke, to start with. We've done a lot of segments from the book of Luke, but we'll also get into Revelation and the Pauline epistles, and probably the book of Acts quite a bit as well. I don't know about the book of James. That is something that we might actually dip into as well. So we've been looking at many different authors who have their various ciphers for New Testament decoding, different ways to look at the New Testament. In particular, we've looked at a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or authors commenting on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and kind of giving you a different lens, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you don't know, were discovered in the 1940s and 50s, but they date back to the 1st century AD or BC, maybe. And they describe, what's he called? The teacher of righteousness, a teacher of righteousness, and then an evil priest, wicked priest, and also a liar. And they use very much language that is reminiscent of the Gospels or prefigures the Gospels, same kind of jargon, a lot of the same code words or names of titles of rituals and or practices and or beliefs. And this has been revolutionary, because prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, really the Gospels and the works of Josephus, really the only 1st century sources that we have to document the history. And as we are beginning to find out, and we will find out experientially here on this channel, that the Gospels and the works of Josephus were both written by the same entity and are two sides of the same coin. Basically, they are intended to be read together, and when that is done, the whole kind of mockery of the Gospels becomes apparent. And so we are now also, you have to recognize who Josephus was, if anyone. And Josephus was originally a Jew and a priest, but he was recruited into the Jewish army to be one of the commanders for the war against the Romans in 66 AD, and he eventually surrendered in that war to a general called Vespasian for the Romans, and gave Vespasian the star prophecy after he realized that God no longer favors the Jews, God favors the Romans. And so Josephus defected to the Romans, and he predicted that Vespasian would one day become emperor. And lo and behold, very soon thereafter, Vespasian was given the call that you're to become emperor, come to Rome. He hooked Josephus up, got him out of his POW situation or whatever, and brought him to Rome, adopted him as his son, and made him the court historian for the Roman imperial court when Vespasian became the new emperor in 69 AD. He left his son Titus to be the military commander for the Romans in their siege of Jerusalem and afterward for that war. Eventually, Titus also became the emperor, and Titus worked feverishly to get Vespasian, his father, deified, which is something that the Roman Senate has done for a few of the Caesars, including Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and Claudius, and now also Vespasian and eventually Titus. They've all been deified. And Josephus's history, called the Wars of the Jews, it parallels the Gospels. The Gospels are set back 40 years, to the 30s. The Gospels, the War of the Jews came out in the 70s, which is also the time that the Gospels came out, more or less. I think the book of Mark came out first, maybe in the late 60s, certainly after the war began, and then Luke and Matthew came out later, and John came out much later, but in the 90s maybe. Some people dispute that, but that's a general timeline. So these were kind of being written at the same time, and if you read them together, you recognize that they parallel one another, especially this Flavian signature. That's what they were called, the Flavian emperors, which means blonde. And if you read the Gospels, you'll see that Jesus makes a prophecy in a metaphorical manner, speaking in symbolic language. But then when you read the corresponding passage in the War of the Jews, you find out that the Emperor Titus fulfills Jesus's prophecy literally. So Jesus predicts something figuratively or symbolically, but Titus achieves it literally, which kind of forces you, given that War of the Jews is supposed to be a history, if you believe in Josephus, or you believe in the War of the Jews and the historical method, then you have to kind of recognize that the Gospels are a parable of Titus, and that Titus is really the fulfillment of Jesus, meaning that he's the second coming of Jesus, and that all of the events of Revelation we're not waiting for them to occur. They've already occurred. They occurred in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and other activities thereby, around that time. And what Christians need to really understand they need to red pill themselves on this stuff post haste, because really when they are worshiping Jesus, they think they're worshiping Jesus, they're actually worshiping Titus Caesar, and maybe also his brother Domitian, who is even a more odious character. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to go over the book of Luke and show all of those parallels. We showed many of the parallels from Joseph Atwill's book called Caesar's Messiah, and also his Shakespeare Secret Messiah. And, you know, to invoke Shakespeare, whoever he was, which Atwill suggests that he was a Jewish woman named Amelia Bassano, who had Moorish blood and came from Italy. And she knew this whole thing about the Jesus hoax, that the Romans created a psychological operation to create Jesus in order to mellow out the Jews, who were constantly rebelling and insurrecting on them. And so they came up with the Prince of Peace, who believes in turning the other cheek and rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and walking extra mile with his backpack, and calling a centurion the greatest belief, you know, and that was used to, you know, sell the Jews on a more peaceful hero, Son of God, and also used for, you know, the rest of the hoi polloi as well. And it was also an inside joke and a mockery for the Romans to watch, use some of this coded language, which you can see. And the humor is, as Atwill calls it, grim, making fun of cannibalism, and that's kind of the main thrust of it. Eating Jesus's body, that is that Christians need to reevaluate that, because they're being mocked like crazy with this communion. So we're looking here at the work of Michael Menescot's, who expands greatly on Joseph Atwill's thesis. And interestingly enough, he's got a number of different articles on the internet, including his kind of compilation article. And this is where you really see the signature of, he basically gets you, incidentally, this is a mathematical procedure that just evolved in the century before this first century AD, which is to plot points. And so he's got the book of Luke on a vertical axis and the book Wars of the Jews on a horizontal axis. And every place that he finds a correspondent, he puts a dot, and plots all the points of parallels, and it reveals the Flavian signature. It spells out APTVS. Now, the AP don't know exactly what the AP is all about. Menescot suggests that it could be standing for Arius Piso or Agion Pneuma, which Agion Pneuma basically means the Holy Spirit. And so the Romans created this trinity, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It could be some other things, Aries and Pisces, but the TVS stands for Titus Vespasianus, and it is indeed the exact signature that is on many Roman coins from that time period. It says TVS. And so, now the interesting thing is that um, until right now, I've been working with Menescott's articles that are on the internet. He's got 7 or 8 articles on here, and they're very useful and informative, but they're really hard to navigate. They're voluminous, and they are constantly referring around, and they're just kind of cumbersome. I mean, the topic is very hard to get to wrap yourself around, because there's 7 books of the Wars of the Jews, and then the Gospels. You're really looking at the book of Luke, but there's also some stuff in Matthew and Mark and John that contribute. And then there's Josephus has the Wars of the Jews, but he also wrote the Jewish Antiquities later, which is 20 books. And there's some of that's in here. And then there's his autobiography, which is also in here. And then there's also the Slavonic version of Josephus, which is, kind of the Russian version, I guess. And it's got a whole lot of other stuff in it that the regular version of just Josephus doesn't have. And then there's another translation of Josephus that, also has a little bit more information. So it's kind of, you got to reconstruct the scene, and it's extremely complicated. But the long and the short of it is that he finally put out his book on this subject a couple months ago, and I finally found out about it, and I'll be getting that book here coming very soon, in 4 or 5 days or whatever. And I think we're going to deliver that. But for now, we're going to just kind of go over his thesis and the way he thinks about this, and then we will proceed from there. Okay, so this is from Menescott's compilation of the Flavian origin of Jesus' story. My thesis is that his strategy, that being Vespasian, and later that of his son Titus, was to design Jesus' story and publish this good news. Again, good news, we normally think of that means the gospel, but gospel really means, according to Atwill, good news of military victory, which again is pointing at the Romans and not Jesus. Good news of military victory, albeit with hidden messages concealed within it, which could later be revealed to indicate that the emperor himself was the second coming of Jesus, to thereby convince all the Jews, commoners, slaves, and indeed the legions, to see him as their God. And also, again, to mention that Josephus's Wars of the Jews, it was seen by the ancients, many of the ancients, as fulfilling the prophecies of Jesus. And as a result, it was part of the Bible for many different sects, many different Christian sects, included Josephus's works as part of the Bible, until they realized that it kind of, yes, it validates Jesus's prophecies, but it makes Titus the second coming of Jesus. And when they kind of got their head around that, most of these sects got rid of it. But still, the preterist sect has Josephus' Wars of the Jews as part of their canon, their biblical canon. So, continuing on. However, this was not enough. The emperor's objective was to make everyone adopt pure emperor worship. So it was necessary to include additional hidden messages within the Gospels that could later be revealed to show that Jesus was just a fiction, and indeed merely a parable about the emperor. in order that the emperor worshippers could be made to become pure emperor worshippers. Atwill doesn't really make this point, and we'll see how he does in presenting evidence for this when we start the book. This aligns with all of their motives and would meet all of their objectives. The section is called Existing Evidence, showing that Vespasian's government was responsible for Jesus' story. In 2000, I believe 2005 actually, Joseph Atwill published his book Caesar's Messiah, showing that Jesus' story contains many obviously intentional parallels with the story in Wars of the Jews, describing Vespasian and Titus victoriously leading their legions through Judea, crushing it and destroying Jerusalem. The locations of the parallels Atwill discovered are plotted below. Those where Luke appears to parody the Wars of the Jews are light blue, and for the reverse, I use dark blue. Basically, this is the Flavian signature that I went through over the past week, and this is just a small sliver of the V of the Vespasian, a little bit of the S of the APTVS pattern that is made when you plot these points. I'll put some of this onto the thumbnail so you'll be able to see the whole picture. The clearly visible string of parallel events in Jesus' story and the emperor's victories certainly points to a pro-emperor author for Luke, but doesn't prove it. One argument that I think Atwill struggled to address was, quote, surely it makes no sense that someone creating a new religion would include evidence within it showing that they made it up. The thesis explained above and the emperor's requirement that belief in Jesus could be brought to an end once the people had accepted him as the second coming and were hooked on emperor worship, explains the observed facts. He'll have to go quite a ways to convince me of that particular argument, but I'm open to it. The proof that the Roman government created Jesus' story is detailed in this paper. If we look again at the sequence of parallels Atwill published, we can see a sequence of them that are arranged in almost the same order in both documents, and all of them involve Luke parodying Wars of the Jews rather than vice versa. So that's the Flavian signature that we looked at over the last week. These parallels are mainly ones where the victories of Vespasian and Titus in Wars of the Jews are metaphorically paralleled by Jesus' life story in Luke. It was this sequence, give or take a few, that the Jewish and Gentile priests would have been ordered to show to their newly Jesus-following congregations. This would have led those Jesus followers to accept the emperor as his second coming. Again, I just want to point out that he talks about how Vespasian had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do this, but he doesn't mention that he has the method to do this also, meaning that Vespasian and Titus did the exact same thing with rabbinical Judaism. They created that as well. Right after the end of the war, they gave a land grant to this guy Ben Zakkai, and he started rabbinical Judaism, and eventually, they put out the Talmud and the Mishnah and other like Jewish works that are more into kind of the minutia of Scripture, and because they no longer had a temple, they no longer had their sovereignty, and so they had to, kind of cling to anything that they could get their hands on, short of, total revolt. And also Titus spent much time trying to get Vespasian deified as a god as well. So Titus is literally the son of God, and he literally created at least 2 other religions that we know of, in addition to creating Christianity. So, the method is also there, in addition to the means and the motive and the opportunity. Okay, it is possible that this was originally intended to be Vespasian to worship. Yeah. But that his plan was derailed by his unexpected death in 79 AD. Now, I'm pretty sure that Vespasian died of natural causes. He was quite old. I believe he was, for that time period, I believe he lived to be like 70. And, but that is also the year of the Pompeii volcanic eruption. And I know that killed a lot of people too, including like Pliny the Elder. But I believe that Vespasian died of more natural causes. But anyway, after that, Titus became the emperor. So whereafter Titus continued the project via the publication of a second edition of Wars of the Jews. Josephus talks about that in his preface to Wars of the Jews, that he originally published this in the father tongue, is what he says, which people think that he's talking about Chaldee, the language of Chaldee, which is a Sumerian Semitic combination, I believe, that maybe somebody like Abraham, but a later period, somebody from that area of Mesopotamia. But and that was to recruit people in those provinces for the Romans. But I don't know that anybody has ever found a copy of that original version of Josephus, but he's saying that a second edition of Wars of the Jews also came out, and this time he's saying that it contained the first 2 books. There are 7 books. And the first 2 books do not cover the Wars of the Jews, which started in 66 AD. They cover a period for the 200 years previous to that. So he's kind of saying that they added on these first 2 books, and that included the A and the P on the graph. So it started with the TVS, or maybe just even the VS for Vespasianus, and then the T came in for Titus, and then the AP came in, which seems like it would have come in for Domitian, but he's arguing differently. So he said this would explain why the surviving version of Wars of the Jews mainly promotes Titus and states that there was an earlier non-surviving version. Yet many hints remain in the text suggesting Jesus was also being equated with Vespasian and not solely Titus. And I believe that there are also like hints in the text that they're faking this original version. I think that he says somewhere that the translators said that this is an original. This was not published in a different language at first. So Josephus could have been lying about the first edition in a different language. I don't know if there were two editions right after one after another in Greek, which is what the Josephus was written in. Also, the Gospels are written in Greek, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in Hebrew primarily, but a little bit in Aramaic and Greek. A second sequence of parallels to form a final revelation to cause the followers of Titus to abandon faith in Jesus. My own research builds on Atwell's discoveries and was a several-year effort finding and cataloging the parallels between Luke and Wars of the Jews. These are plotted below, and you can see that there are far more than Atwell has shown in his book. Now, I will put this photograph into the thumbnail, and you can see the APTVS pattern according to his plotting. Now, it gets a little bit more tight than this when you make a couple little changes that he suggests, but this is the kind of the rough draft of just plotting all the points that he found that were in common parallels between Wars of the Jews and the the book of Luke. And it is pretty clear, but not 100% totally clear. And, you know, there may be other parallels that he didn't find either. You know, a lot of this it can be based on very kind of esoteric information that you have to know other information to be able to make the connections. So to think that he found all of the parallels, I think, is a little bit unrealistic. There probably are a lot of other parallels that exist that he did not find. So anyway, I think we'll stop right there, and I will put this image in the thumbnail, and so you can kind of see the raw data, and then eventually we'll be going over all of it and kind of confirming each one of those dots. Like, okay, does that make sense? Is that really a parallel, or is he just kind of making this up, or is he just kind of you know, finding things that don't really exist? Now, some of these are, you know, you have to look for them to find them. Some of them are totally obvious. So that's kind of just how it works. There's so many of them that all of them can't be obvious because people would have figured it out immediately. So anyway, we'll get further into this in the future, starting tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today.